elements of your
Yes.
charter review support. I can't really say that enough.
Yes.
Any members of the public that would like to chat with us?
There are none.
Okay, then in that case, we've got, I suppose there are two things. One, am I correct? Is this the last meeting we scheduled, or do we have one on the books after this?
Nope, this was the last one that we scheduled.
So why don't we sort of do that first? I want to take everybody's summer temperature and see how often we've been meeting pretty diligently. I can hear you, Joan. We've been meeting pretty diligently, and I wanted to know what people's availability looks like. I personally start to run into some availability problems as we sail past July, but certainly have plenty. So I'm wondering what we think about meeting maybe once in July and then perhaps going to sleep till early September, or do you want to meet in early August? What would you like to do? Oh, and just not to reiterate, but we're still allowed to meet electronically like this, at least for a little while, right, Lauren?
Hopefully forever. We should know soon.
Mm-hmm.
Good. So we're good for the moment, and we'll see how we do. So what do you want to do for scheduling for meetings? Hold on for a second.
I'll defer to all of you guys. I'm very flexible.
Yeah, I'm pretty flexible.
I'm pretty flexible too.
I need to
Oh,
do
hey,
some
Noreen.
homework, but that doesn't need the whole group.
So how about, what if we met on the 29th next? So that's just a little under 2 weeks. Would that work for everybody?
It's good for me.
And then do you want to target a meeting in July so we don't go too far? I don't want to go so far that I can't remember the thread for sort of my feelings. So maybe, I don't know whether the 13th or the 20th is one of those days better for you than the other?
Is this August, Joe?
July. I thought maybe we'd kind of skip a couple of weeks.
Oh,
into
June
July.
29th. Right, June 20. Okay.
Yeah,
June
so
20.
June 29th and then either July 13th or 20th, and then maybe one time in August.
Either one works for me.
Yeah, I mean, we might as, do you want to do it the 13th? And then if something comes up, we could have the 20th as a fallback?
Yeah, sure.
It's fine with me.
All right, so we'll do the 29th, we'll do the 13th. And then, and here's where I start to become a little bit
Yeah.
busy. I'm away for a big chunk of the first 2 weeks of August. I could do the 3rd though, if we wanted to put that in. I also have a problem that I don't want my schedule to mess everybody up, but I also have a problem that when I get back, the semester starts, and my calendar becomes this aggressive monster.
Mhm.
So would maybe August 3rd look like a time we could meet? Does anyone have a conflict there?
Works for me.
I have a conflict, but that's okay. You guys can.
Well, do you want us to look at the 4th or 2nd, Joan?
I can't do the 4th.
Let's see.
Second?
2nd is a Monday. Yep, I could do the 2nd.
The 2nd.
Works for me.
Works for
Okay.
me.
Okay, so why don't we set that up, and then when we're on the 2nd, let's see where we are and what we could do.
Okay.
And just the second one was July 13th.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So we're dropping basically to once a month-ish.
Okay, good.
It's summer. We're the hardest working charter review committee currently established. That's how I feel.
Madison.
In Madison. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Well, good. In that basis then, and now just to talk about what to do at those meetings, I was thinking a little bit today about, so we'll continue our march, but hopefully our march is going to start to gain steam, right? We have a couple of hard issues in front of us, but then we're going to hit the end. The way I'm thinking about this on a process basis is we should continue doing what we're doing unless anyone has a better idea. I've found this productive and helpful. And then when we're done, we've been flagging a lot of things that all look to me like a lot of work for Lauren, which just makes me happy. That's fine. No.
Good.
So, but eventually those are going to have a response. So my feeling is the time, whenever that time is, we get back together and we should isolate our comments. You know, you're the Charter Review Commission, you can talk about whatever you want, but I feel let's go through then the subject, the areas where we said, Lauren, look into and see if we can narrow down the scope. And then we can talk about sort of bigger policy pieces. We talked about breaking up into groups. Why don't we see where that part of the conversation leads us and see what issues are? And maybe then we should hopefully be in fall and we can maybe get people's attention and do a little bit of outreach and perhaps even have a public hearing on some of these things.
And correct me if I'm wrong, as long as we're under a quorum, we could do groups. Is that correct? No.
No, that is what we
You
used
still
to
have-
think was the rule. It is not.
Okay.
Once
So
you
it-
call it a subcommittee and you're doing work, even though you're not allowed to vote on it, you still have to be meeting in public for the public to access what you're talking about.
Okay.
So, but what we could do is think about different sort of study committees. So we say, you know, you two guys make your recommendations on this, you two do this, you two do this, you know, or reach out to different groups and then report back. I think that's okay. Does that sound right, Lauren? Yeah.
Okay.
So as long
So
as
kind of
everything
homework versus,
homework
action.
versus convening.
got it. Okay. Sounds like a plan.
All right. Good. So now let's pick back up on our our march. As a boy, I saw the 1930s version of Gunga Din once in black and white, and it always they had these long marches. You know, it's kind of think how I think the Rudyard Kipling and the Charter Review Commission.
Yep. Yep. Oh my goodness. Okay. I took a cinema course in college. That was one of them. So.
Okay. So
Oh, excellent.
last time you guys ended at 4.1.2 and you agreed to talk about that when it was a bigger conversation about the first selectman and the board in
Right, I think
conjunction with the Board of Finance.
Yeah, I think we wanted to talk about those two boards kind of side by side based on the feedback that we've gotten from our early meetings.
Yeah. So we, before we left at the last meeting, Joe asked everyone to look at 4.1.3 and to start that conversation there today.
Right. So I guess what I sort of if you remember, my internet was like fading at that moment. But I think what I was thinking is, in terms of the general description, does this adequately describe what the board should be doing? Like, and a friend of mine is up for running for one of these boards in a different town in Connecticut. And I sent him to his town charter and I'm like, great, now do you know what you're doing? It's like, no, I have no idea what this is. So does this say enough? Are there categories we should be thinking about differently in terms of the Board of Selectmen? You know, it's kind of an overarching question.
You know, one of the questions was, I'm looking at these A through Z and I don't see anything that jumps out at me as a problem. But I think one of the biggest questions we heard from both boards was who's on first, who's on second, what's responsibility. If you look at D, I think they just need to look at the charter. You look at D, be responsible for obtaining, compiling, reviewing, and recommending changes to the budget. And I think sometimes, and I've been a Board of Selectmen, so I understand how this happened, but I think they got caught up with a little bit of thinking they were the budget authority on some things. And I think that says it clearly that they recommend the changes, which is what we do. And then the Board of Finance takes it, but over the last few years, that's gotten muddied a little bit. I don't know if we can make it clear.
Well, I also think that the Board of Finance should basically, should not be going into the weeds and saying, no, these are not the programs you want to have. I mean, it's like, okay, this is the dollar figure Board of Selectmen you have to live under, and then go back and figure out with your department heads how that's going to work. Because I think for, the budget authority may be the Board of Finance, but it's the Board of Selectmen that has to implement the policies that are around those budgets. And if something, they're recommending a certain policy, and then if the Board of Finance says, no, we don't like that policy, so we're going to remove it from the budget, that's, I think, an overreach on the Board of Finance side, right?
That's the gray area. And whether
Right.
or not we're saying we don't think it should be a policy or be in the budget, or we're saying we can't afford to do that.
So
Well, what are
I have a simple-minded view, having been on both sides of that discussion, that our budget has line items and dollar amounts. And I've always sort of thought of it that the Board of Selectmen approved the line items, and then the Board of Finance approved the dollar amounts. And that you can see the immediate thing. Well, what if they make it zero? But you know, it at least it kind of goes through. But before we get to D, can I just point, you know, our eyes to C for a second? So does this say, and by the way, I'm not in this section with an agenda. I just didn't want to say, yeah, it's okay, because it's sort of the fundamental enabling stuff. Does C look all right? You know,
I don't, it seems, okay, I'm the outsider on
No,
this,
but
and I'm really
that's good.
confused
Yeah.
about, so I have no dogs in the hunt or history. So I don't understand the Board of Finance. I mean, and it seems to me that they're the fiscal watchdogs. That is, the question they're asking is, can we afford this? And are the long-term fiscal stability of the town where it should be?
Right.
So why then is the Board of Selectmen looking at the fiscal needs of the town?
They're the ones who have to work within the budget that has been approved
And develop the budget.
and develop the budget.
They take the budget from the year before, make the changes, as does the Board of Ed on the education side. And then they
Okay.
both go to the Board of Finance, and it's a little different once it gets there for the Board of Ed. Obviously, they only have bottom line.
And I
control.
think that might actually not be a bad thing on the bottom line control for the Board of Selectmen too. Because then they say, you know, Board of Finance comes back and says, listen, you got to cut this by 300,000, go back to the drawing board with that. And you determine what needs are more critical within the,
Well,
you know, within the operation of the town.
So
I-
can I spotlight one part in that first sentence that jumped
Yeah.
out at me? Why is it the case that the Board of Selectmen oversee the annual report and the auditors? I mean, any organization I've ever been part of, the executive team doesn't deal with the auditors. I mean, they do. You deal with you know what I mean. But there's an audit committee. If we were, you know, if we were running the, you know, the Liz Shoe store, you know, we'd have an audit committee. I'm sorry, LizShoeEmporium.com. But the, you know,
Well, I mean,
but you know, so why
Not
isn't the,
not necessarily, and you know, it's the executive committee that acts as the audit committee when the audit comes in
yeah.
a lot of times, and that's
And
what
then-
we're looking at is the executive
And the
committee.
audit, and the annual report are different. There's a lot more in the annual report than just finances.
Right,
Yeah, but it's produced under, good gracious, GASB. We have auditors. We still have Bloom Shapiro. I mean, you know, whoever does it for us. I'm just wondering why it is the Board of Selectmen that deal with the annual report. You know,
Well,
because
all they do is, okay, it's obviously done by staff.
that report to them.
Write a
right,
letter.
right. So the staff reports to
Board
the
of
first
Selectmen.
selectman. And so therefore, it's the Board of Selectmen that reviews and does the preparation, and they do the annual report. And the annual report is like the state of the town.
Yeah, it's a government required document that we produce with auditors. And so, and I'm not aware that there's ever been a problem with the annual report, but it
No,
just,
but
rereading it struck me as strange. We have a finance board. Why aren't they overseeing the annual report?
But each department puts something in that book. I'm sure they look at what they did last year, but
Sure.
isn't that correct, Lauren? You almost like land up putting it together.
I end up doing the whole thing.
Yeah.
That's what I
A
thought.
lot of fun.
Yeah.
But I think here, and this is where the language is confusing, this does not reference the uppercase A, uppercase R annual report. This is actually just saying that there needs to be a report
Oh, right.
submitted annually of these expenditures, not the official annual report. So that's definitely something you guys want to change for
Oh,
clarification.
if that's how we're reading it, we should absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's funny
Yeah.
because as staff, we don't read it like that. So I didn't even highlight that as a potential issue because I just knew what it meant. But this basically is just saying like, there will be a report that's compiled annually with these expenditures, not the official annual
Annual
report that's on
report.
file with the town clerk under state statute.
Right,
we
but
need-
it's also, okay, sorry.
Go ahead, go you go.
No, but it's also, it doesn't state, like, we remove the capital expenditures and the so by removing, setting forth the amount, purpose, and proposal and method of financing projected capital expenditures, you've taken that piece out and you just say, and the capital improvement plan. So by the time the annual report is created, the capital improvement plan is partway through its process. So it's like, okay, here's the start of our capital improvement plan for the upcoming next year. Here's what we did in prior year, and now here's what we're doing going forward. And I do believe that that is, to me, something that the executive branch should be doing.
Yeah, but it's, to my mind, this is a very different proposition from the charter designating who oversees the GASB filed auditor thing.
But that doesn't-
Versus
this is not what it
this.
says, though.
Yeah, well,
That's
Call
the
me
thing.
nuts.
It's not a
I-
GASB file audit, because I think in Board of Finance, there is a review of audit, correct?
Is there an official annual report listed somewhere in the charter in another location?
I believe it is listed
You know,
capital.
yeah. So we should, if we should clearly then indicate that the publication of a yearly report, and not use the term of art, because that surprised me. Like at the very end of our last meeting, we looked at it because I'm like, wait a minute. Seems
But
like
do
a
you
funny
want-
thing.
But the annual report is not just, and a lot of times, it's not just the financial side of things. It has a lot of things that have
Right.
to do with operations, and it's a narrative of, in any corporate, you just don't get an annual report. You get the annual financials within the annual report, but the annual report talks to a bigger encompassing thing.
Well,
And Joan's right, it's sort of a state of the town. That's what it is overall.
y-
Or maybe,
yeah,
It's an-
so
That's
should we
not
name
what
it
it
State of
says,
the Town?
guys.
So
go ahead,
I-
Bob. I'm sorry, I missed
Okay.
your hand.
Well, okay, it says, it doesn't say that the review is of what the government is doing. It says the review is of the needs. And I don't think that that's what's intended. I mean, what are the needs exactly? The town does a lot of things that aren't exactly needs. They improve the town, but
But you don't
they're
put need,
good policies, but they're not really needs.
Yeah.
We're reviewing the needs, not the policies or what the
is that in
government
C,
is doing.
Bob, is the
What?
needs, is that the
Yeah,
needs? that-
But it's, right, it is in C, but it says administrative, governmental, and fiscal. So there's 3 parts of this annual report.
Of the needs. We're
Yeah.
only looking at the needs. It doesn't say we're looking at the programs.
So we're looking at, so this is not the.
I would say this may be a language thing, but
Yeah,
No.
maybe we should, if we could, why don't we take just a
Get rid
brief
of
step
needs.
back and say, the charter's got this section. What do we want them to do? And then make sure that that language comes through. It sounds like we've got 2 things. And if I could just sort of separate the first part before we get to including the preparation, be responsible for conducting a continuous review of the current and projected administrative, governmental, and fiscal needs. So if we put a period, needs of the town, if we put a period right there for a second, is that sentence okay? Because I feel that understates what the role of the Board of Selectmen is. They're not just reviewing, right? They're managing, they're making recommendations to the first selectman. I mean, that feels too small to me. And then we had this thing where I was looking at the annual report and Joan, I would argue that the annual report has a function that auditors oversee. You may give it a state of the town, but that's a thing, and their job is to go through and they take the narrative and ultimately they sign off. If this is not that document, then I would probably then say, including the preparation of a yearly state of the town report, right? And,
I
like
and we,
that.
and we had received a suggestion from Dave Anderson that I thought was really good that I forwarded to Lauren about also, you know, putting some thought into what that annual town report should be. Because, you know, we could probably include a section later on what that might be. And he was asking, should we talk about resilience budgeting, if I recall correctly? I don't want to understate it, Lauren. I think I sent you the email as one thought. You know, we maybe if we wanted to, and this continues on something that we were talking about, if we wanted to sort of put some meat around, hey, once a year, you know, Fillmore, Tom, Peggy, you're going to stand up in front and you're going to talk about certain things, and it should include at least and give some guidance. I personally think there's a lot of value in that. You might say, yeah, 5 people are going to go to the auditorium. I think then you have to assemble it, you have to talk about it. I think it's helpful. So the first thing, because now I just monologued and I'm sorry. The
Okay.
first part for the conducting a continuous review, we've got other stuff coming through. Are we okay with that sentence? You know, if we just the first part of that, I don't know that I don't know that I have a better idea. It's just like I had questions in this section.
You were having trouble with the word
Needs.
of conducting a review. Is that your problem?
Where do we get the idea? So Noreen, you and I decide that we think, you know, pick your favorite town department, beach and rec, zoning is a mess. And we're one of 2 selectmen. Well, all we need is a third to go along with us to say, we're going to now pass a resolution that we want to get a report of the zoning enforcement officer. We want to hear from the beach. You know, we have more power than just responsible for continuous review. So let's go to Joan.
But it says it at the end, though, as it may be necessary to carry out our duties, may require such information from or joint meetings with
Yeah.
boards. And
Do you
so you
see?
can call meetings, right, as part of C.
Yeah, it's
Oh.
only calling meetings. So let's go Joan and Bob.
So
We'll try
the
and do order.
question, so the question is, this is Board of Selectmen, not the first selectman. So do we want to say continuous review and management? Is the Board of Selectmen truly managing, or is that the first selectman managing?
That's a $10,000 question, because that the way we've operated, any 3 selectmen can largely subsume the authority of the town. And if we want that or don't, we should probably clear. Go ahead, Bob. You had your hand up too.
No, my just thing is that what you're describing is not a review of needs.
Right.
It's a review of what is going on and what's being provided. It's not just about needs.
And
So
that's
my objection isn't to what we're doing, but it's the word needs, that we're not just focusing on needs.
And I'd like to go back to something Noreen said a few 15 minutes ago, when Noreen, when you said, you know, there was some confusion and people thought the Board of Selectmen were the budgetary authority. I had forgotten all about that argument, and you're absolutely right. So, I mean, future boards will read this, particularly when you get into a fight with pick your other favorite board, you know, then you're going to say, well, that's not your role. And this feels like an understatement of the Board of Selectmen authority. I mean, maybe if we finish this section, we'll be happier, but the stuff after this is kind of specific.
It is very specific.
It even says so.
I think what, you know, the current and projected administrative, governmental, and fiscal needs, the fiscal needs are in the budget. It's not in there unless it is needed. No, I know you're arguing that, oh, there's lots of wants and things like that. Once the budget's approved, it's a need then. It is a requirement, right? If the people say, yes, this is our budget, it shifts from wants and maybes to now it's a need because the people have voted and this is what they want to have happen. So that's where I think there's a little bit of disconnect. I mean, it's the operation of the town is usually based upon what has been put into the budget and projected for what is next year's, what maybe their wants at the time. But as soon as that budget gets approved, then it becomes a true need because it has to happen.
You know, Bob, I think Joan's right. I don't think this is the needs and wants thing. I don't think needs is in there like that. I think it's just, as they look at administrative, governmental, and fiscal, what are the issues and what need to be changed, I think, or need to be addressed. I think that's why that word is there. I don't think it's in, you know, sort of a wish list.
It almost feels like it should be requirements.
I just did a source and I was gonna say, I've
Yeah.
got Word up and I go, what's another, requirements is a nice
Okay.
one, yeah.
Get that word out of there, needs out of
This is
there.
my favorite
And-
committee. We do thesaurus work. Go ahead, Bob.
So, okay, be responsible, okay, what we're trying to, okay, fiscal requirements of the town. So, Joan, I understand what you're saying, and I think I agree. Once it's in the budget, that this is what we're doing, yeah, that's requirement. Okay, so we're going to do a review of the current and projected administrative, governmental, and fiscal requirements of the town. Okay, I'm comfortable. Does that make
So-
sense to you guys?
I think it's a better word. I think you're right.
I think that makes sense. I'm still troubled by, and please, if I'm alone at this, just let me know. But I'm troubled by the fact that the language doesn't describe, to my understanding, what they do. Right? Be responsible for conducting a continuous review of the current projected administrative, government, and fiscal requirements of the town. Okay, that sounds nice, and that's a very important thing to do. But that's not what most of the agenda is.
Taking
Most of
action.
the agenda is people coming up and saying, oh, you know, we need help for the blah, blah, blah. We need a policy. We need a resolution. We need, you know, most of it's people coming in because there's a problem. And is that addressing a requirement? You know, it looks to me like it's, you know, the baseball field needs stuff. It just feels like an understatement. Or alternatively, that's for new stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get things that sound like, you know, this isn't working well. So we're there to fix something.
Joe, would you be better if instead of just review, there was also an action word there? Something with.
I
That's
think
what
so.
That's what the agenda is. It's half the agenda are action items.
Go ahead, Joan.
I want to talk about be responsible for carrying out the decisions, policy, and ordinances of the town meeting, except
Go ahead.
where the town oh, sorry, I am muted. So I think that covers the policy stuff in A. I think the be responsible for obtaining, compiling, and reviewing recommended changes to the budgets of the various towns is that next step. Because when somebody comes and they want something, it's either a change of a policy or they want money. So I think those other two sections kind of may cover those.
So are
Just
there
a thought.
cases where the Board of Selectmen sets a policy?
Are there occasions where they do? They set policy a lot.
Bingo. So they're not carrying out the policy. They have a lot of authority.
Well, they're doing both, Joe. They're doing
Both.
both.
Yeah, but that's
So,
How about
literally not
for-
what it says.
How
but
about
they're
for
responsible
making
to
and
carry.
carrying out?
Oh, go ahead, Liz.
I'm sorry. What about be responsible for making and carrying out the decisions, policies, and ordinances?
Yeah,
Or-
maybe between what you just said and what Joan said, we're onto something. It's almost like we need a something else after A, and then then the rest of it makes sense. Like be responsible for carrying out the stuff from the town meeting, and then setting policy and engaging in managerial oversight, you know, within the bounds of their authority, something like that.
But then you got to
Well-
define what their authority is.
And then you've got to be careful you're not stepping on the first selectman either
Right.
with day-to-day operations.
Yeah, well, you're right.
You know, we don't want to, sometimes you can make this charter be a problem by having too much in it. It's not so bad. You want to have it clear, but you don't want it, being a little broad isn't such a bad thing.
I like what Lauren put in there on A, be responsible for setting and carrying out the decisions, policy, and ordinances of the town meeting, except where the town meeting otherwise designates.
Well, why would you be setting a decision if you're saying it's being set by the town meeting?
So I think, so basically, the Board of Selectmen starts, they write the ordinance, and then the town meeting approves it. That's where we're kind of in, they write a policy, and if it requires town meeting, then they approve it, but there's also their own policies that they set as well. So,
Right, so we set labor policies and adopt holidays, and those are all,
Right,
this is the problem I'm having. It's the Board of Selectmen is an active managerial board, executive board.
how
And they
about,
vote on stuff.
How about-
setting policy, let's do, because an ordinance does have to be approved by a town meeting. So
No,
setting.
it doesn't.
Oh, it doesn't? in it?
Nope, it never has. It always just goes to a public hearing and then the
Oh,
board of
that's right.
selectmen approve
Then
it.
we approve.
So,
Okay, so setting
so-
policies and ordinances and carrying out decisions. How about be responsible for setting policies and ordinances, period. Carrying out the decisions of the town meeting. Unless where the town meeting otherwise designates. So if the town meeting says, yes, we got to do something else, the next step, there may be another step that has to happen. Does
you
that
might
make
not,
sense?
Joan, you might not need that first town meeting because you're saying they're gonna carry out and be responsible for it, except for the town meeting otherwise.
Well,
designate.
no, but they also have to carry out on the first part of the, I like where this is going. On the first part, that's their own initiative, right? Boards of selectmen have there. And then the second part is, and you're going to do what the town meeting said, unless you're not the people to do it. So
Right.
the town meeting could say, could hold a meeting where it tells the Board of Finance what to do,
Right, like for the.
Or
or the
senior
Charter
tax
Review
or the-
Commission.
Okay,
charter.
I didn't see that.
And,
Well,
and if I could, if we think of A as the power they have to do stuff, then maybe C becomes, or now D, now you're confounding me. The be responsible, that one becomes, we just need to put in the word oversight. And this is now their oversight authority, right? Be
An
responsible for,
oversight.
yeah, for
Review and
oversight of the
oversight.
town and conducting, and then we could just kind of leave the rest of it.
Yep.
As long as we fix that, yeah.
Re- Continuous review and oversight? Review and oversight, yep.
I just personally hate the word continuous because what is continuous?
Right,
Yeah,
And who
Yeah, they
determines if
only
they're
meet twice a
fulfilling that or
month.
not?
right.
Yeah.
The only continuous person we have is the first selectman.
Yep.
Right.
Oh, I like this better.
Yeah,
Review and oversight. I like it.
Yep.
Woohoo!
that makes more sense.
Also, just a suggestion, where it starts this as it may find necessary, do we want to make that just like a standalone paragraph and make it applicable to all of these items?
Yeah,
Instead of just applicable to C or
Yeah.
D, whatever it is now?
yes.
Can I ask, is it clear who's a town officer? So for instance, if Joan, Noreen and I were back in our old chairs and we wanted to ask Stacy to come to Stacy's the head of finance for the town, and have Stacy come to the Board of Selectmen because we were worried about what the first selectman was up to. Is she a town officer? Is
Yes.
that, would that go through? Could we get you to come up?
Mhm.
Like, who's a town officer? Why isn't it town officer or employee?
There used
I mean, you
there
could
used to be a
clarify.
there used to be a treasurer. Is there still a treasurer? That was considered a town office. There's
Right,
no-
that was like this last town officer. I remember the treasurer too. I think he
Yeah.
retired around, I don't know when.
Yeah, that's
But-
right.
Did
Right,
they
we had
re-
an independent treasurer who would come in and
Right.
review the books along with minority person.
Yeah, geez, I'd forgotten all about that.
Yeah,
It was, it was the fellow, the principal of Daniel Hand's brother. Oh, they were both great, but he's very involved with Rockland.
yep,
And
yep.
yeah,
I'm trying to remember the name, but
I want to say
Auslander?
Overland, something
Yes.
like that. What is it?
Auslander.
Auslander, Overlander.
Yeah, that's right.
Don.
So
Oh,
I-
there is.
I
Yeah,
think
Joel's
that's
brother.
a town officer versus a town employee.
Yeah,
Right.
and so Again, this is where like the semantics of the uppercase versus lowercase o. So
Right.
I believe the intent of this officer was all encompassing versus the uppercase o, which would have designated an actual
So
town officer.
why isn't it any employee or employee employee official board commissioner agency? Isn't that everybody?
Yeah.
So just because I could, luckily, I don't think this has ever become an issue, but these are all sort of governance and oversight things, right?
Right.
You want your board of selectmen to be able to say, wait a minute, we want to talk to this person. That's kind of, I think, the intent, but you could easily see that, nope, they don't have to come see you. They're not a town officer.
Right. I like the having it stand on its own too, Lauren. That's a really
Yeah.
good idea.
I agree. All right, well, thank you for indulging me in the look in this area.
No, I think it was a good cleanup.
Just E.
Yep.
Now
E.
F, be responsible for developing and updating annually a 5-year capital plan and a 10-year long-range financial plan biannually. We don't do that. So the suggestion was just updating annually a 5-year capital improvement plan. That's what we have now. That's what it's called.
I'm all in favor of that.
Yep.
The more we can integrate the CIP as the,
Yep.
by the way, this for those of you that aren't engaged, this is a term of art. I forgot how many towns in Connecticut have CIPs, but it's a really big number. So this is it's a natural sort of way to do things. And we joined it 4 or 5 years ago. So I guess the one sort of placeholder, Lauren, is to include a section on what's going to go in that state of the town report, because it's now relevant here. And let's just make sure I don't want to derail this, but I don't want to do that yet. Like, let's go through this, but let's not lose the fact that we need to add a section to, maybe it's under the first selectman, because he has language where she has language in that section, but we just need to make sure we clear it up.
Hey guys, on this whole section, well, I still see one problem. If I read this as an outsider on the budget, the Board of Selectmen makes recommendations. And then somebody else acts on those recommendations, presumably the Finance Board. So this would mean that the Finance Board, it is legitimate for them to say, well, we think this is their recommendations, but we think they're spending too much in this area and not enough in this other. That, in other words, we've heard criticisms that the Board of Finance, the words have been used, stay in their lane, and that at least some Board of Selectmen people think that the Board of Finance should be limited to looking at whether we can afford it now and in the future, but they should not be looking on policy preferences.
All right. So
It says doesn't limit what the Board of Finance should be looking at. These are just recommendations. They're not.
So Bob, what I would suggest is kind of put a pin or sticky note on that, because I think that's the key discussion that we need to have. But I want us to, from my perspective, is to go down to the Board of Finance, like march through this. The Board of Finance
agreed.
is coming, and then, but like scribble that down. Go ahead, Joan. You have your hand up.
Yeah. So do we want to put something about plan of conservation or a 10-year plan in here as well? Because the Board of Selectmen is responsible for that piece as well.
Maybe for the state of the town report, putting the POCD in, I really like. So the plan of conservation development is required under Section A of the Connecticut General Statutes. It's an every 10-year thing that goes in. And frankly, when I was zoning chair, we ran that process. And a lot of towns hand it to the zoning commission, but it's a whole statement of the town. I like putting that in. One of the most effective things we ever did on a policy basis was we had a checklist. The advisor we had who helped us with the plans put it in. And when I was on the zoning commission, we would go and look at it and update it and check on it. Like that's how you continue to make progress across a decade. Putting that visibility for the selectmen, I think that's a great idea. So maybe just leave that in that section when we do the reports and see, we might gather a couple of things up in that. I love that.
I mean, you can designate it out to another board and that, similar to capital improvement plan, starts off with the first selectman, then goes, this is to the CIP committee, and then goes back to Board of Selectmen, and then goes to Board of Finance. So there's a lot of stuff that goes along with that. I like being responsible for developing it, but you're designating where it actually should be, which is, planning and zoning, because it is part of planning. So,
Yeah,
Excuse me, Joe, I know planning and zoning still oversees it, but when they appoint a committee, I know they look for volunteers. Does the selectmen, do they report to the selectmen or do they report to zoning? Easy.
my rough recollection is that they reported to planning and zoning. So when I was involved in it twice, the tail end of one that had gotten done and then the update. And in both cases, it was really the zoners that ran it. And then you made a presentation to the Board of Selectmen for their adoption.
right. So there's
But
still
it doesn't have to be that way.
right. But they're still kind of overseeing it because they're adopting it. You know what I'm saying? They're the final adoption.
I in my experience, I would describe the interest as casual. And it's a very important document as regulatory.
I know.
effect.
I was pretty interested in it. There's several, depends on who's doing what. Okay.
Yeah.
But something to put a pin in, let's, maybe,
Yeah.
maybe annual 5-year and 10-year, plan of conservation and development.
So Lauren, keep this one as like a net and let's see what types of charter-based reporting comes in. And then we can see how we want to do things without micromanaging.
You don't want that to be lost. Do you know what I mean? It's such a great document that we want to continue to utilize that.
I agree. And
Well,
I think that,
I think planning and zoning looks at that as a major job of theirs. From the last 2 cycles I've watched, they
Yeah.
certainly taken it. And some of the same volunteers come back.
if I recall correctly, I think we spend almost $100,000 on it. I mean, it's not a small undertaking, and
The consultant, right.
yeah. But the looking at it every year and updating it, it includes a lot more than just zoning. Yeah. Okay. Do we want to, are we comfortable to go down and look at some of the specific powers? So Lauren, I look at some things like acceptance of roads, which I know we have to do. If I recall correctly, we had an issue at one point in time where a neighborhood was quite concerned about our road, and we had to go back to the old books and see that we had accepted it as a town road in the 30s. But is this list largely a statutory list?
Mostly, except when you get to like dollar thresholds, that is specific just to this charter, and that is one of the things that staff has suggested can and should be changed, just to update with the times. The cost of things and the sale price of things have changed a lot since this charter was enacted in 2006.
Oh, so let's take a look at the changes on employment.
So the suggestion here is, the first suggestion here is to take out this parenthetical that includes representing the town in the conduct of collective bargaining, because the board does not do that.
Right.
We have HR, and we usually have a town attorney that represents the town.
Okay, that makes sense.
I think that was written back when we really didn't have a formal
Yeah,
HR person either
yes.
setting it up, right?
So can I ask just a threshold question on this? Should it be the Board of Selectmen that hires and fires versus the first selectman? Like, should every employee necessarily be hired and fired by the Board of Selectmen? I mean, the one nice part about it is it means that a first selectman really can't come in politically, and remove people and bring in their own folk. So I
Mhm.
think it gives a lot of comfort. On the other hand, is that because then you have a bipartisan board that has to agree, it has visibility. You wouldn't want a first selectman running around and making a lot of staffing changes, Is that okay? Do we have any thought as to the entire board doing it? Because that means
Joe, that's what I brought up last meeting. The idea that employee, with the change of the guard, employee gets asked for resignation. That's unheard of in our town, but it's happened. And then no action was taken, but it was attempted. That won't happen if we follow what's here. It's the whole Board of Selectmen that does it, not just no one would have a right to ask for a resignation based on
well, that's why if you think about it, Noreen, I would argue that the condition is exactly the opposite. They had to ask for the resignation because they couldn't terminate. Right? That's in a weird way. If I go to you and say, I don't want you here, please, I'd like to ask for your resignation. Your answer is no, I'd like to chat with the Board of Selectmen.
Well, I'm sure if there's warrant for some issue, but I'm talking about a change of administration. And I'm sure in cities that happens, you bring your people in, but it's just, we have long-term employees, they retire out of our town. And in my 25 years, I've only seen it happen twice. And it was stopped both times. And I think it's because the whole Board of Selectmen is involved. I think it takes away the politics of it.
So the clarification as to the powers for termination, I think rather than in discharge appointed officials and employee, maybe approval of the discharge of appointed officials and employees.
So let me ask you sort of a bad question. So aren't there occasions, what is the power if something terrible happens, you have an employee that's acting inappropriately, and make up your own, like, clearly this person should go. What's the power of the first selectman at that moment?
She would call her HR director, and there definitely are state laws, labor laws that we've got to be very careful with. And you'd want a professional guiding the Board of Selectmen. You're answering I think the flip side of my question. I'm saying you have a situation that should require immediate termination. Something's, someone takes a slug at someone, Lauren has a terrible punch. I felt it, that kind of thing. What is the power of the first selectman? Can the first and maybe we need to go to the first selectman on this part. Can the first selectman suspend any employee, remove them from the premises? Because the way this reads, it sounds like any employee for any reason can say, nope, I'm staying here at my desk. Well, this doesn't say anything about getting rid of anybody. This is appoint, hire, determine conditions of employment. Oh, and
discharge.
In discharge.
Who are appointed officials?
All the appointed committee and commissions.
Oh, officials.
You guys are all appointed officials.
Yeah.
Okay. So would all the employees be, like the senior staff? They're all appointed officials?
No,
we're all
they're employees.
Well, wait a minute. Hold on. This is an excellent point. That shouldn't be here.
Right.
We're not employed. Unless my town check has been waylaid on the way here for the Charter Review Commission.
No.
But you're head of a committee and cause a problem that you have to be relieved.
But I'm not saying they shouldn't remove us, and please do. I've got a busy summer, but it's the section is employment.
Yeah, it would make sense if we put something about the appointed officials in section 8.
Yeah.
Which is specific to appointed boards and commissions.
Or give them
I think that goes back to the appointed treasurer that was appointed. I think that, and since we no longer have that appointed treasurer, I think that was specific to that role.
Well, that was an officer. But
or maybe we consider a power. I mean, these are the specific powers of the Board of Selectmen, and maybe we should have a separate section that says, and to discharge, appointed officials.
So,
You know,
So take
it
that out.
actually references, just before we go on, it actually references Article 7, and I have Article 7 pulled up on my phone. Article 7 is,
Attendance.
yeah, it's saying that appointive offices under Article 7, which seems a little wonky to me anyways, are the assessor, the director of health, the tax collector, and the town clerk.
Because they have certain authorities, autonomous authorities. That
Who are they
don't have to be approved. So like the health director doesn't have to get the board of selectmen to approve if he needs to shut down a restaurant. That he has autonomy there. I think that's,
well, but there's another problem because Lauren, you're exactly right. But notice the section 7.1.1, town officials, town officers.
Yeah,
So
so
when we
7
talk about who's a town officer, it's a defined list and it's not who we think it is.
yeah,
Ouch.
so rather than appointed officials, then should maybe town officers
yeah.
Yeah.
there. And then as referenced in Article 7, and we'll clean up Article 7 language. Does that make sense?
Well, I think you can take appointed officials out because isn't there another part of the budget, not the budget, the charter that talks about attendance at meetings, the way you
Yeah.
get board? Maybe whatever we have to be in that part, not this, not maybe appointed shouldn't be addressed here.
Right.
Well, I guess. still
At the
powers.
very least, it seems to me it's not employment. So leaving it in this section may make all the sense in the world, but leaving it here makes no sense to me. Does that, like, this is employment. These are people getting a check, you're employed. So this feels like a way to for us to get into trouble. Us, the town, them.
I agree. I like the changes that have been, say, town officers and employees. Yes, because it's employment.
Yeah.
They can start paying us. We'll be okay.
Can I just ask for a rename when, I don't know if it was Joan or Lauren, the town officials were town clerk, assessor, tax collector, and who's the other one? Health?
Board of Assessment.
Health, assessor, health, tax collector, town clerk.
Health, yeah, okay.
Because sometimes they have to go under other parts of the government. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah,
I
but
think
that list is under inclusive. So for instance, the zoning enforcement officer is a town official who has a badge and can shut down a business without anyone blinking. Right? We have a couple of groups.
I mean,
the town
police-
engineer,
We got the
Building
fire
official.
fire marshal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Fire
better
marshal.
example.
All right. So how do we determine what the all-encompassing list should be?
Well, so why don't we, for the moment, just add like an A prime or a new B that says is entitled not employment, but either oversight or just put town officers and officials, like just for a second, and realize we need to treat that different than employment. And I almost feel like employment. I feel like this should be like town employees. Don't you think? Like, I guess employee. Well, but
okay. So has there ever been a time when a town officer was not a paid employee?
And that's what I think, Joan, thank you, because I was going to just say that. That's what I think this charter maybe is safeguarding against, maybe a time when the town clerk was elected and not compensated. But I don't think that that's been the case in a very, very long time.
Right. I think the assessor was too.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, we're probably going back 20 years.
Oh,
Right. And I
more,
think honestly, the fire marshal may have been volunteer as well for a while, if I remember correctly. So, but the question is, do we want to, I think we want to keep that in just in case for some reason it goes back to that way of doing things, right?
And then I just think we clean up section 7 where it says officers, including but not limited to unpaid positions of XYZ. That
Yeah.
way, in case something that's not listed does go to an appointed or elected position that's unpaid, we would have that kind of safeguard.
so
That makes sense.
if we went with, looking back at A, so it sounds like we're still good with the idea that the Board of Selectmen shall appoint, hire, determine the condition of employment, and discharge employees of the town pursuant and consistent with
I think Article 7 of this charter
is the wrong
and
place.
any kind of employment law. Do you know what I mean? I think we got to kind of put into any
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of consistent with Article 7 of the charter and any contractual obligations of the town.
Well, why are we even saying Article 7? Shouldn't it be consistent with the charter, the Connecticut General Statutes and state law? You know,
Right, not specific to one specific article.
yeah. So just to be clear, then the system will be Board of Selectmen wants to hire somebody, they go through. Now they have to, the first selectman has to come back to the board and say, okay. They want to fire somebody, okay. They have to come to the whole board. Good? That's the way
Right.
that's the way we have it currently. And probably, Lauren, we should make a little point just to make sure the language of the first selectman's powers reflects that a little more clearly, if I recall. And Noreen, I think that's a point that will make you happy.
And I think too, that we could also find out the point you brought up, Joe, about an emergency. Someone does something horrible and they, years ago, we didn't have a professional HR. We have somebody to guide us. We have a town attorney, but they would work directly with the first selectman in an emergency. There might be something under the board of first selectman's powers that says that, I don't know, but obviously that could come up.
You could give the selectman the power to suspend an employee.
Yeah.
Subject to.
So there are safeguards in the personnel policies. We didn't have a personnel policy before. So I'm
Oh,
just
that's
putting that in
perfect.
here.
There we go.
So state
Personnel
statute,
policies.
personnel policies, and ratified union contracts. That way it encompasses everything that governs employees in a day-to-day.
Very nice.
And that's where you want it. You don't want it in the charter.
Good.
Exactly.
Ratified union contracts. Good. I'd like to make sure that when we eventually send this, when we're all done, we send it to Ira. He looks at that. I don't want to. I know so very little about labor law. I don't want to think the word ratified union contract to trigger something. I'll let them deal with that, or Floyd.
Yeah, that's just the language that we use when the Board of Selectmen approves changes to union contracts.
Yeah.
That's state language. So hopefully
That sounds
we'll be fine
swell.
with it.
Okay.
So town officers and officials, because later on we're going to have the board of selectmen, when we get into section 8, that the board of selectmen has the ability to appoint board members. I mean, how do we want to deal with officers and officials? You say that they will appoint town officers and officials pursuant to this charter. Just leave it at that for the moment and see what we get.
Well, maybe town officers and officials as to this charter, but also state statute.
Oh.
Yeah, because sometimes we're, by state statute, we're required to have certain things.
Yeah.
Versus, yeah, okay.
That sounds good to me.
B.
And
Now
when we get to those sections, we'll just remember to see if we need anything else back up here, but that sounds fine.
Mhm. All right, I'd like removal of setting bonds for individual roads because yeah. Because that's part of the CIP and how things get paid now. So it kind of falls in under that. Okay, that's good. And this does make sense because they had a wrong, they got a new sign for my road and it, instead of stepping space stone, it did stepping stone. And I called and I said, that's not the legal name. And I was like, well, that's what the Board of Selectmen approved. And I said, I don't think so, because all of our deeds say stepping space stone. So they looked up and they're like, you're right. Okay.
Did they fix it?
They fixed it.
Good.
This is the highly responsive nature of the town and the issues that I think really define us for the 21st century.
but people remember that. You know, Joe potholes, they remember stuff like that in signs.
I do, though. I've my road is, it no longer has Hill Road at the end. It's just HL, irrespective of the street signs, because that's what the USPS database says. If I write my actual legal name of the road, I can't get my stuff delivered.
Same thing with lane, LN. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Do we
Okay.
want to stop here at 6
Um,
o'clock, or are we going to go longer?
Are you guys okay? Because I think we can just knock this section down with the rest of it fairly quickly.
Yeah,
we
unfortunately, I have a hard stop at 6. I need to sign off.
Okay.
Bye
Well,
after.
Then all I could say is the dollar amounts that Lauren was calling out to us, maybe everyone take a look and a little bit to this gut feel, but why don't we make sure to do those right off the bat when we get together next time?
Right.
You know, 50 grand, 20 grand,
Agreed.
these make sense
Yeah.
anymore.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Otherwise, then Lauren, if you'll send out the calendar invites, we'll see everybody in 2-ish weeks.
Great.
Thank
Great.
you. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Oh, do we have any members of the public, Lauren, that want to have comments?
There are none.
Okay. Phew.
See,
Good.
Jen isn't here today.
Yeah.
Stay
All right,
safe,
everybody.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
You guys
Thank
always
you.
be right.
Thank you so much. That was a good
Hang in.
discussion.
Bye-bye.